Today, I would like to say a few words about the term neuroplasticity. And the reason I want to look at neuroplasticity specifically is because so many people, professionals, parents, ask me or talk to me about the child potentially regressing. They would come to a certain stage and they would get in a nice place, and then it feels like, oh my goodness, that we're back to stage one. We're kind of this today. It feels like all of that work, all of what we've attained, is just no longer possible. I'm certain this resonates with many of you. And so I thought that the best way to really explain it to you is through the word neuroplasticity. It came to us in the late 1900s, in fact, in the very late 1900s. And it helped us to understand that the brain is essentially plastic until the day that we pass away. So they even found plasticity in aging brains that struggles with diagnoses like Alzheimer's, dementia. So this holds a huge amount of promise. When I grew up as an OT, they used to think that by the age 9, cut. You can't delete anything after age 9. After that, no hope, right? Oh, I'm so glad that that's over. There is a whole lot of hope until the day that we pass away. So in the brain, what happens during development is that the brain develops at a certain speed. When you stimulate the brain through therapy, through exercise, through experience, the brain picks up speed. When the brain picks up speed with multiple exposures to experiences, starts to attain the skill is always in the memory bank of the brain. The only way that the brain can lose that memory of that skilled experience is either by blunt force injury to the brain, which is not the case in developmental delay, and also aging, or maybe having a medical diagnosis that calls on deterioration or degeneration. So in actual fact, if you as a professional or as a parent are having to deal with situations of developmental delay, whatever the diagnostic category is, the hope is that if they showed a certain skill yesteryear, that skill is still there. But stress, new growth performance, new growth demands, new stress demands on the system can cause these skills to go into hiding, and especially the most recent skills. We will have families that has just recently maybe potty trained their child. And then they come through our program and suddenly they have accidents again. And they say, well, I'm wanting my child to get better, Maude. I get that. And yes, they will get back to the potty training that they've had. It's just the most recent skill, and the automation in the brain is not quite there yet. So in order to really look at why is what I'm saying really quite true, the big guy that summarized the neuroplasticity research for me in a big way was Norman Doidge in The Brain's Way of Healing. And so I would recommend that book for those of you who are wanting more information on this. And really, he affirmed for me what it was that we were seeing, that no matter the age, as we have certainly grown into having an adult population now that we're working with, that we can change that brain. And so what he says is that there are 3 different pieces for us to remember about neural networking. The first piece that he talks about, and I'll use his words, the pervasiveness of learned non-use. And this is basically the principle of use it or lose it. That if a pathway is vulnerable in developmental delay and it's not being used or pruned in the right direction that we needed to go for fast, expedient, skillful learning, and the child chooses a bypath to get to that same result because the performance expectation is what people want to see. So then the child, that network that is the most essential network lies dormant. And that dormancy is then causing if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, right? So we have to basically, with any neurostimulation, we have to perk up. that dormancy of those cells and get them to come alive again, to get the most expedient pathways going. He also talks about the noisy brain and brain dysrhythmias. And basically what they're saying is that some of the neurons, when they are injured, still cause ripple effects on other cells that is actually perfectly healthy. But because of the impact of where the impact is, it also causes the more healthier cells that was actually more available not to operate at their full use. So that's another principle you have to think about in neuroplasticity. And then his third comment that he made is that there's a ongoing formation of neuronal assemblies that has to happen. So it's a very flexible structure, and that every time we do an act and we do an experience, then we can take that experience and we can use the re-experience of that experience to lay down firmer and firmer, more solid foundations. And this is why we see children when they play or when they develop, we see that what they do is they play sometimes the same thing over and over. And some people are worried about that because they're also worried about certain diagnoses. I'm not going to go there today. We can talk about that another time. But it's actually quite typical for many kids to repeat play experiences. Every little guy that exposed to a ball the first time and we're rolling the ball to them, they will try and roll it back, and they will want and look at you to do it again, right? That repetition of that action, that experience, is what really supports us to know that, okay, this is what my body is feeling when I'm rolling that ball, and this is what my body's feeling when I'm catching that ball. And so because I know that feeling, that action brought a feedback system into my body. And so the next time that I'm going to do that same action, I can start to use a feed forward system to help me to understand exactly where I need to go next. And it's that feedback feed forward system of repetition that lays down the skill in an automatic way. So it is a flexible structure. And again, flexible until the day that we pass away. So there's 4 stages that Deutsch mentions that we also use in our center to a great degree. And the first stage is neurostimulation. It's the first piece, is that you got to stimulate the nervous system. Experiences do, activities do, having language discourse do, all of that absolutely is helpful. When you are simply vegging on a couch, when you are left alone in your wheelchair by your own devices, when you are not being stimulated, there's less opportunity for these dormant cells and these ripple effect cells to be able to get to a fuller place of being. Activity is necessary. And so these days we are so fortunate that, yes, it doesn't always need human interference, that we now have technology. We have sound therapy machines, we have metronome machines, we have all kinds of things that can help us to give more consistency and more frequency. And the neuroplasticity research also highlights that it is really high intensity and high frequency that changes the brain. You got to get that stimulation in. It's at a very frequent interval in order to make the brain go in a different direction where you want to go. And yes, when kids are older, it is harder, right? And I think that's why they used to believe that you can't change that brain, because your brain does get into a habit of, this is my bypath, this is my bypath, this is where I need to go, right? But when we activate on the more stronger bypath, that's the original one that was intended to develop for a specific reason, then it is a little bit scary in the beginning. And so many older children, also adults, they know what they know, but they don't know what they don't know. Like many of our children live every day with a high sense of sympathetic arousal. And this is what they know. They literally don't know what it feels like to be relaxed. And then we say, calm down, relax. And they're like, okay, I'm not calmed down, because their body doesn't know what it feels like. This is where they are. You have to really help them to understand that their body can feel differently. So neurostimulation is the first stage of any therapy. Second stage, he calls neuromodulation. So neuromodulation is really where we looking at the reticular activating system to get to that just right place. We're getting to the autonomic nervous system where you are putting the sympathetic arousal system in a nice balance with the parasympathetic, more calm system, more embodied system, right? And so that piece needs to be there. This is essential for regulation. If you're struggling with a child with self-regulation, we always talk about co-regulation. I'll do another session on that co-regulation piece later. But we know those pieces because we want to bring the child into a place of rest and digest, right? Which is our beautiful vagus nerve. But you got to get the sympathetic arousal to have that balance. I need to be sympathetically aroused for certain jobs, to pay attention, to be part of a sports team, to be alert and awake for the things I need to do. But I also need to know, when do I need to take a break? And how to do that based on my individual profile. So that comes as a second stage. And then the third stage is neurorelaxation then. And especially, this is where sleep comes in so importantly. And in his book, he really extrapolates on the point, and I'm going to repeat what he said. He says, while sleeping, the glia opens special channels that allows waste products and toxic buildups, including the proteins that build up in dementia, to be discharged from the brain through the cerebral spinal fluid. So the ultimate place where the nervous system relaxes is in sleep. And in sleep, it has a huge action on divulging or getting rid of all the experiences of the day, including the waste products that's part of the neurophysiological system, so that we can get that place of, okay, a new beginning in the next morning. And so many of our children who struggle with developmental delay struggle with that sleep piece. And yes, we will have some talks on that later. I look forward to you guys commenting and saying to me, which of these things would you like to know more about? Because there's a variety of things I can talk about and that I can investigate, even if I don't know it maybe offhand, right? And help with, so that we can have some earnest discussion on these things. So this stage is 10 times more active in the sleeping brain than in the waking state. So it's an important part of healing to understand that sleep is part of that healing. Incredible. And then the fourth stage is when the brain is now rested. The circuits can regulate themselves, and you can get a stressful message, but you can sort of say, okay, I'm going to put that in the back burner. I'm going to deal with this right now so that I can get on with what I'm doing, and I'll get there later. And you can make these decisions in an effective, executive way. So this brain is then the brain that's ready for learning, right? And if you think about those processes, then think about all those children, all those students who are sitting in classrooms, who are sitting in different spaces, and they are expected to perform at a level where the brain is not rested and ready to learn. This is why this is so important. That's why we have to look at neurostimulation. And yes, there are all kinds of programs out there for neurostimulation. And maybe we can cover some of that next year. Then when a parent comes to me after a whole lot of work and we've gotten the child into a good space, and for now the child wakes up in a completely dysregulated state, we can know that this child's mind has maybe had a flashback of past experiences where they did feel out of control, and momentarily it put them back in that frame again based on those past memories. Our brain remembers every single experience we've had in our lives from in utero. It never stops remembering. Now, we don't have to consciously remember it every day. Thankfully, we have something called implicit memory that can bury these memories for us. But when kids have had troubled beginnings, flashbacks is a reality. And they often use the flashback to determine if the present circumstance is something that they really want to go for, because they're reminded that last time they were in a similar position, this is the way they felt. and they don't want to feel that way again. So all of these things have impact on, is it a true regression or not? So when we think about this whole continuum, and I want you to really sit down and think about it, and think about the therapy you are providing. Think about the experiences you are providing, and think about where you are as a professional in terms of how much neural stimulation am I giving? Am I focusing largely on accommodative types of strategies, or am I focusing on remediating some pieces that maybe I could remediate? If the brain is plastic, we can have an influence. For me, therapy is about facilitating. It's not about teaching. It's facilitating the brain, the experience of the child, to get into a better place of being. And so neuroplasticity affords to me the neurophysiological backdrop upon which I have grown my program. And I'm still growing, still learning. I'm hoping this is helpful to all of you that's struggling to understand this whole regressing piece. Always trust that the brain still has it. Another maybe example I can mention is that I have a certain hierarchy that I follow, as you've already gleaned in my earlier sessions with you. A family would come to me and say, oh no, Maude, we're not going to do, say, interactive metronome again. We've done that before. We didn't see much ability from it. I say, oh, okay. The brain still remembers doing that program. And this is what is so hopeful for families. And I want you to really hold on to this. Nothing that you've ever done is actually for naught, because the brain still has it. But it may not have been in the right place where the interactive metronome was on top of a system that wasn't ready to receive the timing, because timing is a later development. Rhythm is the earlier development of timing. And so if the brain wasn't quite ready for that, it can't find the place to use it as effectively as it needs to. But when you follow a developmental trajectory and you put it in more or less where we can figure out in the right place and space, then that child who's done the IM before, when they start getting ready, they show a much higher capability of adapting to the program because of their previous experience. The same with things like vision therapy or other therapies. I'm not saying that all therapies work. But I'm just saying that there's another concept there at work that we must keep in mind if we're keeping in mind what is neural plasticity and the huge capability of our brain to remember what it's been exposed to. Okay, so until next time, take care.